Good morning to one and all present here. Legal Intellect welcomes you to its webinar. The theme of today's webinar is First Information Report. I'm Tushita Sonkar, and it is a matter of immense pleasure for me to be a moderator for this event. Firstly, I would like to introduce our guest speaker for the day, Mr. Akash Tandon, sir. Mr. Tandon is an advocate at High Court of Delhi. Sir has completed his BA LLB from Christ University, Bangalore, where he was awarded the Academic Excellence Award for securing the highest aggregate marks in his batch. Sir holds a master's degree in criminal and securities law. He has participated in numerous moot court competitions, conferences, paper presentation, and MUN conferences. Sir has also published articles in various UGC journals. His areas of practice include general litigation, civil recovery suits, summary suits, consumer cases at district, national, and state consumer forums, Section 482 CRPC petitions, anticipatory bail matters, and many more. He is independently practicing at various courts in Delhi on a variety of cases. Sir has a passion of teaching and interacting with the masses in the field of law. It is indeed our honor to have you, sir. We warmly welcome you. Before starting the session, I would like to brief the participants with some general instructions. The participants have to keep their mic off during the whole session. Everyone should be disciplined and should maintain overall decency during the entire session of the webinar. Do not turn on your mic to talk or for any reason whatsoever. Now, I would like to request Sir to kindly carry forward the session.
Good morning. Thank you, Tushita, for the wonderful introduction. Good morning to everyone. I hope everyone is doing well during the pandemic. Is one of the most important topic which we have in our criminal justice system. So we'll be dividing it into certain parts. I'll be starting with the introduction to the FIR, then the difference between the cognizable, non-cognizable offences. Then I would be discussing certain statutory provisions under CRPC dealing with FIR, and then I'll be continuing with certain case laws, which are the landmark case laws when it comes to first information report. So we'll start with introduction to the FIR. And FIR is also known as the first information report, is the earliest form of the information which has been received by the police officer in case of a cognizable offense. And thereafter it is recorded by the officer in charge of the police station. So what is the underlying reason behind FIR? The underlying reason behind the registration of an FIR is to put the criminal justice motion, the criminal justice or the criminal law into motion. And the main objective is not to put very small, minute details into the FIR, but the major objective is to put the criminal law into motion. Thereafter, this term FIR is not being used under Section 154, but commonly the information which is being received by the police officer is known as the first information report. The first information report should be the authentic one. It should, even if it is a hearsay, it must be validated by the person. So now we will be understanding the difference between certain terms which will be commonly used in our conversation for an hour. So first of all, we'll try to cover the difference between a cognizable and a non-cognizable offense. Cognizable offenses under CRPC are defined under Section 2C of the code. So what does Section 2C of the code says? Cognizable offenses are those offenses in which the police officer has the power to arrest without a warrant. Whereas non-cognizable offenses are those offenses in which the police officer is not empowered to arrest without the warrant. Secondly, when it comes to investigation, in case of a cognizable offense, the police officer can start the investigation without the order of the magistrate or without the order of the court. Whereas in cases of a non-cognizable offenses, it is required compulsorily for the police officer to have the order of the court in order to start the investigation. Then when it comes to the magnitude of the offense committed, in cases of cognizable offenses, they are heinous crimes, whereas non-cognizable offenses are not that serious in nature. So, for example, if we see certain examples of a cognizable offenses are murder, rape, etc. Whereas in cases of non-cognizable offenses, examples may be forgery, cheating, defamation, etc. Then the another major question which comes into picture is, where do we find whether the offense is a cognizable offense or the offense is a non-cognizable offense. So, Schedule 1 of the Code of Criminal Procedure 1973 defines the offense whether it is a cognizable or a non-cognizable offense. Schedule 1 deals with the classification of offenses. It defines the punishment, it defines the offense, it defines whether the offense is a bailable or a non-bailable offense, it defines whether the offense is a cognizable or a non-cognizable offense. It also defines whether the offense is triable by the magistrate or under whom which is triable by or the court of session. So I hope you have a clear idea about what is the difference between a cognizable and a non-cognizable offense. Now we'll be moving to a difference between what is an offense and a case. So a difference between offense and a case is offense has been defined under CRPC under section 2N. So 2N of CRPC clearly defines offense, which states that it is an act of commission or omission of an act which is punishable by the law in force. So it is an offense which in itself which constitutes the consequence of an act declared by punishable by the law. Whereas what is a case? A case is when the moment of a criminal proceedings begin into force. For say the lodging of an FIR, lodging of a complaint. It is when the criminal proceedings begin for that particular offense. It is referred to as case. Case is not defined under CRPC, whereas the offense is defined under section 2N of the CRPC. Now, why do we call first information FIR as a first information report? We call FIR as a first information report because it is the first information which is being received by the police in charge of the officer in charge of the police station after the commission of an offense. Thereafter, it is referred to as first information report. Now, what is the purpose behind filing of an FIR? Now, what is the objective of an FIR? We found out the aim of the FIR is to bring the criminal law into motion, whereas the objective of the FIR is fivefold. The first objective of the FIR is to reduce the substance into writing. The FIR can also be given orally. When it is given orally, the officer in charge of the police station writes it down in the book which is being prescribed by the government. Thus, thereafter, one of the major objectives is to reduce the substance into writing. Secondly, the substance which has been reduced into writing has to be signed by the complainant and has to be verified. Thirdly, the main objective of the FIR is to maintain the record of the cognizable offences which have been committed in the jurisdiction. Then the fourth one is to initiate the investigation. On the receipt of the information from the complainant of a cognizable offense. And the fifth major part is to inform the magistrate as to the nature of the offences and to the information which has been received. So the objective of the FIR is fivefold: to reduce into substance, to get it into sign, then to start the investigation, then to have a record of the information of the cognizable offences, and the fifth one is to inform the magistrate. So these five are the major objectives of an FIR. Now, the next thing which we would move on is what are the essentials of an FIR. What does the FIR actually contains? So what FIR usually contains: in what capacity the crime has been committed, who has committed the crime, when was the crime committed, in the sense what was the day, what was the time, what was the pair, then where did the crime take place, the incident where the crime took place. For say, it has to be mentioned very precisely what was the gully number, everything has to be mentioned in that. What was the motive behind that? Then comes who was the witness, major witnesses, and then comes any casualty which had taken place. If there is any delay in filing the registering of the FIR, that also has to be mentioned. So these are few of the basic essentials which should always be there in an FIR: the name of the complainant, the address of the informant, everything should be there. Then now we would be moving to the most important substance of an FIR, that is the provisions, the statutory provisions which deal with the first information report. So basically, section 154, 155, and 156 of CRPC deals with the police officer's powers to investigate. So 155 deals with non-cognizable offences, whereas 154 and 156 deals with the cognizable offenses. We will start with section 155 to have a better understanding about the non-cognizable offenses first. So section 155 of the CRPC deals with the information as to the non-cognizable offenses and investigation in such cases. It also refers to as the powers of the police officers in order to investigate a non-cognizable offenses. So non-cognizable offenses are generally those offenses in which the police doesn't have the power to arrest without a warrant and are considered as a private civil criminal wrongs. Thereafter, the investigation in such cases is not the responsibility of the police officers unless and until ordered by the magistrate. First thing, so we have divided into four parts. First part is the information as to the police officer as to cognizable offenses. If any person comes to know about the commission of a non-cognizable offenses, he goes to the police station in order to inform the police in charge in commission of a non-cognizable offense. The officer in charge shall enter or cause to be entered the substance of the information in a book prescribed by the for this purpose, and thereafter it is his duty to inform the magistrate as to the commission of such cognizable offences. That is mentioned under section 155 clause 1. Therefore, in such cases, the police officer has no duty unless he is ordered by the magistrate to investigate the case. Part 2 is police officer to investigate the cognizable offences depends on the magistrate order. So the police officer has to get an order from the magistrate in order to start the investigation in such cases. The primary rule is that no police officer shall investigate the case if it is a case of a non-cognizable offense unless and until he has received the order from the magistrate in order to try such an offense. Third thing is one of the major things which you or everyone should keep into mind is what happens in cases where there are both the offenses, both the cognizable as well as a non-cognizable offense has been committed. Where there is a situation in which a criminal case consists of both cognizable as well as a non-cognizable offense, a question may arise as to whether the case to be treated as a cognizable offense or the case to be treated as a non-cognizable case. So to meet such a situation, we have section 155(4) enshrined in our CRPC, which provides that where a case relates to two or more offenses in which in one of them is a cognizable offense and the others are non-cognizable offense, such case would be dealt under a case of a cognizable offense, cognizable case, whereas not standing anything with those non-cognizable offenses. So in layman's language, if there is a case which consists of both cognizable as well as a non-cognizable offense, the case would be considered and taken as a cognizable case. We can take an example of such a case. For example, a case alleging an offense under section 494, that is 494 deals with marrying again during the lifetime of a husband or a wife, which is a non-cognizable offense, and section 498A, that is punishment for subjecting a married woman to cruelty, could be investigated by the police. Though offense 494 is non-cognizable, by virtue of section 155(4), it can be investigated as one of the offense, that is section 498A is a non-cognizable offense. Okay, then comes the powers to investigate a non-cognizable offense. These are mentioned under section 155 clause 3, where a magistrate under section 155(2) has given the order to the police officer to investigate a crime. The police officer receiving such order may exercise the same powers as he will exercise in case of a cognizable offense, except the power to arrest without a warrant. So this is all about section 155, which deals with the information as to the non-cognizable offense. Now we would be dealing with section 156. 156 deals with the police officer's power to investigate a cognizable offense. So what does it say is any officer in charge of the police station may, without the order of the magistrate, investigate any cognizable offense which is under the jurisdiction of that court. Jurisdiction is basically the territorial jurisdiction, the area defined under which the police officer has the power to take charges of the offenses. So, and no proceedings under the police officer may be called in question regarding the start of the investigation. And 156(3) is one of the major remedy which is being available under this, in which the magistrate can order for a registration of a case, registration of FIR under section 190, which we would be dealing further when we're discussing about the remedies available in case of a refusal to file an FIR. Now, after this, we have already discussed in brief section 155 and 156. Now comes a major question, who can lodge an FIR? So FIR can be lodged by the following person. For say an aggrieved himself can go to the police station and file an FIR, or somebody on his behalf can go and file an FIR. Any person who is aware of the incident can also go and file an FIR. It may be in the form of a hearsay, or it may be, or she may also be an eyewitness to that particular case. And one of the other cause is the SHO himself. SHO is the station house officer himself on his own knowledge or information. Even when a cognizable offence is committed in a view of the offence charge, he can register a case himself. And therefore, he is not bound to take down in writing any information. And when if the information is only by the medical certificate on the approval of the injured. Okay. And one of the now we discussed that who can lodge an FIR. Basically, an aggrieved person can file an FIR. Any person on behalf of the aggrieved person. Then any person who is aware of the information, maybe an eyewitness, accused himself, the SHO himself may file an FIR. One important thing, the question comes is cryptic information, a form of FIR. Cryptic information is something which is not definite, which is vague, not authentic, baseless, gossip or rumor, clearly making out a cognizable offenses. So it is to be kept in mind that the person delivering the hearsay is required to mention the source of the information where it is received and submit it according to the along with the signature to prevent him from appointing to a false rumor. Then one of the major question comes is, can a child or a lunatic file an FIR? So it depends upon the lunacy. It depends upon the lunacy of a person. If he is unsound and if he is in the normal stage, yes, he can file an FIR. Lunatic, if he is a permanent lunatic, no. If he is lunatic sound, yes, he can file an FIR. If he is lunatic unsound, no. Then comes child can become a witness if he understands the question. For we have always seen that child can become a competent witness if he is in a reasonable condition to understand as to what is right and what is wrong. He has a rational mind to understand the authenticity of the case or authenticity of the questions which are being asked to him. So if he can become a witness in the case, he can file an FIR too. We will take an example of such a case. For example, if there are three people in a family, a child. For example, there are three people in a case, child, mother, and father. For example, the mother and the father died. So in that case, the child can give the statement, it is taken as an FIR, and when produced in court, he can be a competent witness. Okay. So now we'll be moving to the most important part of our discussion, that is section 154. That is the filing of a FIR information as to a cognizable offense. So one has to understand 154 lays down the procedure as to how the FIR has to be done. So we have divided it into five parts basically. First thing, it should be in a written form. When the information about the commission of a cognizable offense is given orally, it is a duty of the police officer to write it down in the register provided for that purpose and must be in writing. Second thing, it should be read over. What do you mean by read over is, okay, now a person giving the information or making the complaint can demand that the information which is being noted down in the register be read over to him in order to understand whether it is correct, accurate as per his version or not. Then comes the verification. The complainant or the informant should only sign the report only after verifying that the information recording by the police is as per the details which have been given by him. Then comes the signature. Once the information has been recorded and by the police, it must be signed. After verification and reading over to the informant, it must be signed by the person who gave the information. So it is to be kept in mind that unless and until it has been read over and verified, it should not be signed. And whereas the person is not able to read and write, so in that cases, the person is expected to put his thumbprint, left thumbprint impression on the document after verifying that it is correct. So this is all is mentioned under section 154 clause 1, which deals with the procedure as to it should be in a written form, it should be read over, it should be verified and signed. Then one of the major section, that is 154 clause 2, talks about the copy of the FIR. So a copy of the FIR as to the which is recorded under section 154 clause 1 shall be given henceforth to the informant without any cost. It is to be given to the informant free of cost. That is mentioned under section 154 clause 2. And 154 clause 3 deals with in case the police officer in charge refuses to file an FIR. Refuses to file an FIR under the section 154, a person can go to the superintendent of police, can approach the superintendent of police and given a notice to superintendent of police or any other concerned official by meeting them directly. This is mentioned under 154 clause 3, which we would be also discussing in case during the remedies available. Okay. Now, major questions which comes up to the mind of the people always is filing of an FIR mandatory? So this question was considered by the Constitutional Bench of Supreme Court. In the major case, so you all can note it down, I'll also share the notes with you. In the case of Lalita Kumari versus State of Uttar Pradesh. So in the case of Lalita Kumari versus State of Uttar Pradesh, it was a Constitution bench which says that the police officer is bound, which states that the police officer is bound to file an FIR in a cognizable offense. So remedy available if the police officer refuses to file an or record FIR. And why it was made important to file a FIR is as half of the offenses go even are not even filed, they go unheard. So majorly Justice P. Satyasivam, Honorable Justice P. Satyasivam, in this case held that the registration of the FIR brings the criminal law into motion, as we had discussed during the introduction. And he also mentioned that it also makes the documentation of the initial facts so that the later on changes cannot be brought to it. The major purpose for registering compulsory registration of an FIR, the mandatory registration of an FIR, is to bring down the points into writing. And secondly, he also mentioned that the advantages of lodging the FIR in the first place is to take the first step into the criminal justice system, and in order for the victim to get some justice. Moreover, lodging of an FIR also brings into line the rule of law. It promotes the rule of law as the criminal matter is brought into justice on record, which can be delivered. Now, in that case, in the case of Lalita Kumari versus State of Uttar Pradesh, it was also clearly held that the court, that even though if it's a cognizable offense, a preliminary inquiry may be conducted before the lodging of an FIR. Though it is mandatory to file an FIR in case of a cognizable offense, but in that case, certain offenses were mentioned under which the preliminary inquiry had to be conducted. For example, such offenses were matrimonial disputes. Then comes the commercial offenses, corruption cases, medical negligence cases, and cases in which there was a delay of 3 to 4 months, 3 months or more in lodging of the FIR. So in such cases, the court held that the police officer can conduct a preliminary inquiry before the registration of an FIR. So it was later stated that upon the arguments by the both the parties in that case, that the compulsory lodging of an FIR would lead to the more incidents of arrest. Thereafter, it was held by the court that FIR is compulsory, but not making an arrest is compulsory. But whereas after 2009 amendments in the heinous crimes such as rape, murder, the arrest was also made mandatory in order to flee, in order for the accused to stop accused from fleeing away from the justice system. So this is what is the filing of the FIR mandatory, and we would also be discussing the case of Lalita Kumari in detail when we discuss the brief of that case. So therefore, filing of a FIR is mandatory in case of a cognizable offense, but in certain offenses, a preliminary inquiry can be conducted by the police officer. Now, under section 154, it states that the police officer to file an FIR. What happens if the police officer refuses to file an FIR? Do the informant has any remedy in this case? Yes. Under section 154 clause 3, it says that one can bring the complaint in the notice of the superintendent of police or any other official concerned, and complaint can also be sent to him and through the superintendent post through post to the superintendent of police. And if and it is an option. Then it is optional for the officer, if he finds that there is a commission of any cognizable offense, he can either start the investigation on his own or can order any of his subordinate to start the investigation. So this is remedy number one, which is available to the informant under section 154 clause 3. Now, he can also file a complaint to the magistrate under section 156 clause 3, and the magistrate may take in cognizance under section 190 of the CRPC and can ask the police officer to register an FIR. This is a judicial remedy which is mostly available to the person who has exhausted the remedy of 151 clause section 154. Now, the another question comes is, if there is any delay, what if it is a delay in the filing of an FIR? So it is well known that longer the delay, the longer the suspicion. And the police usually ask for the satisfactory explanation as to why does it appear to be a case of a false delay in FIR, or it may be a case of a false FIR as well. So there are major three categories of delay in FIR. Three categories. The first category of delay in an FIR is delay by an informant in lodging an FIR, which is mostly a case of a suspicion which is created by the court. Secondly, the delay in recording by an FIR by the police in charge, by the officer in charge of the police station. And the third one is delay in dispatching the FIR to the magistrate. So a delay in filing an FIR always creates a suspicion in the mind of the court, and it does affect the evidentiary values of the testimony of the informant and also that of the investigation officer. The court may seek an explanation from the prosecution regarding the delay in the FIR, and in such cases, explanation has to be given as to why there was a delay in FIR. But in certain cases, it is self-explained. The delay is self-explained, and the person and the informant doesn't have to give the explanation in order as to delay. This was held in the case of State of Punjab versus Gurmeet Singh, though it is a 1996 case of the Supreme Court, in which it was held that in cases such as rape, in cases of sexual offences, delay in filing an FIR is self-explained, and there is no need to give a separate explanation. Why this has been held? The reasoning behind this, the court said that there is a social stigma which has been attached with such offences, and the fear element attached with these offences themselves are sufficient for the explanation for the delay. Thereafter, the same rule is extended to other sexual offences as well. So this is a common rule which has been stated by the Supreme Court, that thereafter in cases of rape and other things, the satisfactory delay is self-condoned, and doesn't have to be explained because of the social stigma which has been attached. Now, important thing is, can a FIR be lodged through a telephone or by a means of a telegram or something? So, as we all know, that section 154 also says that the oral FIR, oral information can also be given by the informant, and thus thereafter that information has to be reduced in writing and admitted. So it has been seen that in many cases by the police station, a message by email, a message by WhatsApp can also be registered as a first information report, provided that one of the major factors which has to be considered, that such information should not be vague. It should not be absurd. It should be valid with necessary information. It has to be provided under that. So exceptions are there in such situations, and similarly, we have a major landmark case of Sukharam versus State of Maharashtra. In that case, it was very much held that it is important for the informer to be present personally before the police for the registration of an FIR. But thereafter, even on calls, the police has comes and investigate, and there is a pre-cognizance which is being taken. Now, we read about FIR, the procedure for the registration of an FIR and everything. Now we come to the fact, if the FIR with the information which has been given to the police is false, what happens in cases when the informant files a false FIR? So false complaint being registered as a FIR is an phenomena which cannot be ignored. So lodging a false complaint in India is also punishable under section 182 and section 211 of the Indian Penal Code 1860. First, we will deal with what does section 180 talks about. Section 182 talks about the false information which is being given with the intent to cause a public servant to raise his lawful power to injure another person. Such powers are bailable in nature, And section 211 deals with the police false charge of the offense made with the intent to injure. So under section 482 of the of this, it is the punishable which is punishment which is prescribed is for 6 months and a fine. And secondly, in 211 the word public servant is not used, and hence accordingly any person who starts a criminal proceeding against any other person on the basis of him filing a false information to cause injury to the alleged person is liable to face a imprisonment which can be extended to 2 years. And in cases of a charge where it is a charge punishable by death or where it is punishable by imprisonment up to 7 years can be given to the person. So this is the remedy which is being available to the informant. So we were discussing the remedy which is available to the accused, in cases of filing of a false FIR. So first remedy which is being available to him, he has to go and file an anticipatory bail. Anticipatory bail is an apprehension of arrest. It is filed when there is an apprehension of arrest for the accused in order to get arrested. So it is being filed under section 438 of the CRPC. Also, the aggrieved person can file a case for defamation in order that he has filed a false FIR and it has spoiled the reputation of the person, considering in mind the 10 defenses which are being available under section 499 and 500 of IPC. He also has the right to file a petition under section 482. For 482, that is the inherent powers of the High Court for the quashing of the FIR on the basis of the false allegation which is being filed by the informant. So these are the remedies which are available under sections 182 and 211 to the informant, and under section 438, 499 to the accused, and 480 to the accused. So now we'll be discussing the types of FIR. This is something important which is also being asked in the most of the competitive exams and other exams as well. What is a zero FIR? So a zero FIR is a type of FIR which can be filed in any police station, regardless of the place of incidence where the offense has been committed, or regardless of the jurisdiction, whether that particular police station has a jurisdiction to deal with that offense or deal with territorial jurisdiction. So, however, after investigation and filing it with the magistrate, it is transferred to the police station which has a competent jurisdiction to try the case. It is being noted that one of the important thing which is to be considered in case of a normal FIR, in case of a normal FIR, has a proper serial number. On the contrary, in case of zero FIR, it is unnumbered. And after the preliminary investigation by the filing police station, it is being transferred to the other police station, and that at that time it is being numbered there. So after passing it to the other police station, it has a competent jurisdiction. For example, the crime took place in the jurisdiction of PS1, and a person comes to know in the jurisdiction of PS2. So he can file a zero FIR in the police station of in the police station 2, whereas PS2 will make a preliminary inquiry, send it to the magistrate, and later transfer the zero FIR to the competent jurisdiction police station, that is PS1. Such FIRs are known as zero FIRs. Then comes when two FIRs, then comes another example, that is a cross FIR. What is a cross FIR? When two FIRs are lodged about one incident by two people against each other, it is called a cross FIR. One of the wonderful examples which we can take of a cross FIR is example A and B fight. In case of A and B fight, A lodges an FIR against B, and B thereafter also lodges an FIR against A, saying that A was the aggressor. That could be in the same police station. So both will lodge an FIR against each other. This is a mere case of a cross FIR. So these are the two types of FIR which are important, that is a zero FIR and cross FIR. And now we'll consider what is the facets of FIR. For example, in which our FIR has been filed, it goes to the magistrate for taking cognizance. In such cases, if the accused pleads guilty, he is convicted of an offense. Whereas if he pleads non-guilty, then the trial continues, and after the trial, either he is convicted or he is acquitted. And one of the major procedures which we have to discuss is the quashing of an FIR. What is quashing of an FIR? Quashing of an FIR is a provision in a legal system and is a precedence that FIR being quashed is characterized by the lawful grounds by virtue of section 482 of CRPC. So what happens, and one of the important thing which one must keep in mind, that such powers have to be used very cautiously and sparingly by the High Court. So in the heinous crimes, such the quashing of the FIR is not done so easily, and the circumstances under which the quashing of FIR can be done, such may be in cases of a compromise or the amicable settlement between the parties, and it may be in cases where the criminal proceedings are the result of a malified intention or with an ulterior motive for the vigilance of the accused. It may be in the cases where the allegations which are made as complaints or statements by the witness informant makes absolute no cases. And it may be in cases where there is no conclusion can be reached about that there being sufficient ground for the proceeding against the accused. So in such cases, the FIR can be quashed by the High Court under Section 482. The person has to present a petition in the High Court for under Section 482 for the quashing of an FIR. So this is majorly all about FIR, the registration of an FIR and the intricacies which deals with the FIR. One of the other things which deals with the importance of FIR is the evidentiary value of FIR. So one basic thing which you all should keep in mind, that FIR is not a substantive piece of evidence, and it can be only used in the following ways, that is used for the corroborative purposes, for contradicting purposes of evidence, or a person giving the information is required. It can be also used as an admission against the informer, to refresh the informant's memory, to impeaching the credit of an informer, to prove the informer's conduct. So these are certain things where in which it can be used, but it is not a substantive piece of evidence, except under three circumstances. So two circumstances under which it becomes a substantive evidence is a dying declaration. During the dying declaration, when the person reposing about the cause of his death or he is dead, or when the injured makes a statement to the station house officer or the police officer saying that the accused was injuring him, or when the injuries are being caused in the police officer's presence. In such cases, it becomes a substantive evidence. So now, as I promised, we'll also be discussing in brief the case of Lalita Kumari versus Government of Uttar Pradesh. So the brief facts of this is a 2014 judgment of Supreme Court. There were 5 judges bench, the constitutional bench, headed by Justice P. Satyashivam. So what was the facts of the case was, the present writ petition was filed by Lalita Kumari through her father for the issuance of the writ of habeas corpus for the protection of his daughter who was kidnapped. So in this case, a written report was submitted to the police officer, but the police officer failed to file the complaint. Hence, the superintendent of the police was approached under Section 154, Clause 3 for the FIR, and then the FIR was registered. However, no course was taken by the police authorities to recover the kidnapped daughter or to apprehend the accused. So the main issue which was involved in this case was whether the police officer is bound under Section 154 of the CRPC to arrest, to register an FIR upon receiving any information related to the commission of a cognizable offense. So this was the major facts and the issues which were involved in the case, and major 8 points were raised by the Supreme Court regarding the registration of an FIR, which were very nicely described in the judgment. And I discuss in brief the 8 points, the 8 factors, in which 8 directions which were, for say, the directions which were given by the Supreme Court with regard to the registration of an FIR. The first one was, it is mandatory under Section 154 of the Code to get an FIR registered if the information discloses the commission of a cognizable offense. And in such cases, no preliminary inquiry is mandatory to be conducted. Secondly, a preliminary inquiry may be conducted only to ascertain whether the cognizable offense is disclosed or not. In case the information received does not disclose a cognizable offense but indicates the necessity of an inquiry should be done. So it also said that the scope of the preliminary inquiry is only to ascertain whether the information reveals any cognizable offense and not to verify the veracity of the information. We already discussed the categories in which the preliminary inquiry may be made. I'll discuss it once again, in cases of a matrimonial disputes, in matters of commercial disputes, and cases involving medical negligence and cases involving corruption. The court also held that no police officer can avoid his duty of registering offence if the cognizable offence has been committed and hence is disclosed. Strict steps must be taken against the erring officers who do not register the FIR in cases of a cognizable offence. Thereafter, it was made mandatory as directed by the Supreme Court that since the general diary or station diary or the daily diary is a record for all the information received in the police station, all information relating to the cognizable offence, either resulting in the registration of an FIR or leading to an inquiry, must be reflected, meticulously reflected in the diary, no matter even if the preliminary inquiry is conducted or not. So this is the brief about the landmark case of Lalita Kumari versus the state of Uttar Pradesh, held in the Supreme Court by in the year 2014. So this is all about the FIR. Now we'll be moving towards the questions, question answers, question if any queries are there. I would like the moderator to take over and can
Thank you
discuss.
so much, sir, for enlightening us. Now, I would like to ask the participants if they have any doubts and queries regarding the topic. I'm sure sir would be pleased to answer them all. You all can mention your questions in the chat box. We have a question from Mr. Pankaj Padana. The question is, what affects Child Abuse Act arrested as a victim of murder?
So in cases of a child abuse, there is a separate court which deals with the child offences. For say, in case of a POCSO Act, Prevention of Sexual and Child Offences, which was passed, to in order to deal with the sexual offences for the child victims, that is less than 18 years, there is a separate court to deal with. And for the accused, in cases of a child accused, there is a juvenile board. There is a juvenile board which deals with this. And thereafter the punishment which is being prescribed for them is a form of a punishment which improves the person. It is not a punishment in order to punish that person, but whereas they send it to the rehabilitation centers, the accused is usually sent to the rehabilitation center in order for the rehabilitation of them. I can also see a question as a child can be arrested in the first place. So it is not about a child being arrested. Even yes, the child can be arrested. If he is arrested, he is sent to the separate juvenile centers. He is not sent to the jail, which is being sent for the adults, but he is being sent to the juvenile center. And thereafter, the inquiry is thereafter investigation and the trial is committed by the juvenile board.
All right, sir. The questions have been finished. Does anyone else have any doubts and questions? You all can mention them in the chat box. I think we don't have any more questions, sir.
All right, no problem.
All right. With this, we now come to the end of our session. Thank you so much.
All right, thanks a lot.
Yeah. Thank you so much, sir, for your precious time. We are indeed overwhelmed with knowledge in the field of law. Also, I would like to thank Legal Intellect for organizing such a wonderful session. I would like to thank the audience for their active participation. And lastly, I would like to thank the entire team of Legal Intellect who have worked day and night to make this webinar a success. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a nice day.